Generally, high savings and investment it must lead to high growth, but India has a paradox of low growth despite high savings and investment. This is because we can explain this using the high ICOR. Because if ICOR is high, even if you invest more, the output will be very less. So there are the what are the stages in the process of the capital formation? Broadly, there are three stages: savings, finance, and investment. So first, let's see savings, which is also the called as the gross domestic savings, which are 30% of the GDP. So savings is disposable income minus consumption, YD minus C. So the three most important saving institutions are households, private corporates, and public sector. Households account for 60% of the savings. Therefore, households are the most important savers. But also, private corporates and public sector, they borrow more than they save. Therefore, they are the net borrowers. So our households are the net savers. So what are private corporate savings? For example, the income of company, we can calculate it as a profit. 22% of it is given as a corporate income tax. Some part of it is given as dividend, which is part of profit, which is divided between the shareholders, and the rest of the part, which is undistributed profit, which is used for the investment, is called as a corporate savings. Next, we have financing, which is mobilizing of savings for investment platforms through financial institutions, for example, banks, NBFCs, etc. Next, we have investment, which is 32% of GDP, which is also called as the gross domestic capital formation, which is defined as the expenditure on the capital goods. Private sector accounts for 80% and public sector accounts for 20% of the investment. In a closed economy, which does not have any economic relation with the rest of the world, savings will be equal to investment theoretically. But in an open economy, investment is equal to savings plus net foreign capital inflows, which will be both investment and borrowing. Borrowing is external commercial borrowings, and investment are both FDI and FII, which we will see in the subsequent chapters. So government wants to promote investment, therefore they will promote say increase in savings, for example, giving tax benefits under section 80C. We will see this later. And also the increase in the foreign capital inflows. So all FDI, FI, and ECBs are encouraged. Next, we have components of the investment. There are three components. First one is the fixed important. This is the most important one, which is expenditure on the capital goods, valuables like gold and silver, change in stock and inventories like raw materials and unsold finished goods. Let's say an example. For example, a person's income is 10,000 and 7,000 he spends on consumer goods like idli, vada, etc. And remaining 3,000, he saves 2,000 in the bank and 1,000 he keeps as a cash. This cash will be accounted in this third one, that is the third component, whereas this 2000 will be counted in the fixed investment. Therefore, in general, when we refer to investment, we are talking about the fixed investment rather than these two. uh, Next, we have the determinants of the investment. First one is the interest rate. For example, if interest rates, banks are offering low interest rates, people will invest more because the loans will be much cheaper. Next, we have the profitability expectations, which is also can be called as a business environment. For example, ease of doing business. If there is single window clearance, people will try to invest more and make more companies. For Make in India, investments, as we discussed, is very core to Make in India. To improve investment, EODB is very important. Also, other factors like skilled labor, infrastructure levels, and demand in the economy. So, trends of investment for India. Since in 1991, we had around 30% of investment in savings. It peaked in 2008 at 13% and around 37% of our savings. But after 2008 financial crisis, both of them dipped, especially during the COVID. And post-COVID, there is a slight recovery. But still, the investment at 32% and savings at 30% is very low to sustain high economic growth. So this is a concern for India, that India has very low investment rates. Next, let's see Roderick's research, which is given in Economic Survey 2017. So he plotted economic growth versus savings. First of all, savings and economic growth did not have much correlation, and whatever correlation is there, it is in the negative terms. Whereas economic growth and investment had very high correlation, that too very positive correlation. Therefore, traditional approach is to increase both savings and investment, whereas Roderick says only focus on investment with elicit its own savings. Therefore, focus should be on investment rather than savings. So therefore, we can take two conclusions from the Roderick. First one is investment slowdowns are much more detrimental to growth than savings slowdowns. And second is that the policy priority, in at least in short term, must be on investment. Therefore, unearthing black money converting financial gold into financial savings, quoting foreign savings. These are not very important as compared to the focusing on investment. Next, we have paradox of high savings and low income. Generally, if you have low income, people will spend more of it. But in India, despite people having low income, they save more because of cultural factors like dowry and lack of social security, inequalities, tax deductions because of savings, high high interest rates, and stable financial sectors. Next, we have virtual cycle of growth, again given in economic survey. This tells that if we increase investment, it will lead to economic growth, and due to economic growth, there will be increase in consumption, and due to consumption, there will be demand, and due to demand, there will be investment, and the virtual cycle will go on. But investment lead to more economic growth with a 3 to 4 years lag, and economic growth will lead to more consumption with 1 to 2 years lag. This is also given in economic survey, that is lagged effect of investment on growth and of growth and consumption. So GDP growth in the same year, if we increase the fixed investment, the growth will fall down, but within 3 to 4 years, the growth will go up. Same thing for the consumption GDP growth with 1 to 2 years lag. These diagrams are very important as they're given in economic survey. Next, we have fixed investment by institutional sectors. Private sector, as we can see, it is more or less constant. Household sector savings are falling, and public sector is constant. Therefore, overall is falling because household savings are falling. As we have already seen, households are the most important saving institutions. Next, this is a very important discussion for developing and developed countries. Whenever we save more, investment will increase and growth will also increase. And when we save more, demand will fall because people will have less money. Because of this, growth should fall down and price level should fall down. But for developing countries, this is true and this is true. This is true, but this is false and this is true. We'll see why. Let's understand these two diagrams. For developing countries, demand will be much more than the supply. So if we save more, the demand will reduce this much, but still this demand will be much more higher than the supply. Therefore the still the capacity is not enough. Therefore prices will fall down, but investment will increase because there is demand but supply is not enough. Whereas in the developed countries, demand is already less. If we save more, the demand will further fall down. Supply is already more, therefore there will be no incentive to invest more, which will lead to recession because of falling growth, investment, and prices. So this is called as the paradox of thrift, as given by the J.M. Keynes. So according to him, if the savings will increase, demand will fall down and growth will fall down, and which will lead to recession. The savings increase will won't spur investments because already the existing capacity is more than enough for the demand. This is what led to the Great Depression 1929 to 1933. Whereas for the developing countries, productive capacity is already low, that is supply is already low. Therefore decrease in demand will not lead to decrease in growth, rather it will only lead to reduction in prices, which will spur the savings and investment because capacity is already low. So why is this demand so high here and so low here? This is relatively we are speaking, and reasons for the relatively high demand are huge population and developmental expenditure by the government. This development expenditure puts money in hands of the large population, which will spur the demand. And as far as Great Depression is considered, this happened due to fall in the aggregate demand. J.M. Keynes said that this is due to the aggregate demand. So the solution is to increase aggregate demand. So we can say that savings are good for growth for developing countries like India. This is what explains the paradox of high growth with low inflation. Generally, when there is high growth, inflation should also be high, but high growth and low inflation is possible because of this explanation. This is what China also followed. So the solution for the Great Depression, classical economic theory says, since the demand since the due to depression, unemployment is very high. Therefore what we'll do is we'll reduce the wages, whereby for example if there is a burger which is costing 100 rupees, we will reduce and 30 rupees is given as wages, we'll reduce the wages to 20 rupees. Therefore the burger will be given at 90 rupees. Therefore demand will go up, and the people will buy more and more and more, and employment will increase because of this. But this failed very much because the wages are reducing, which will lead to reduction in aggregate demand. That is, people won't have money to buy the burger at all. Therefore people won't buy the burger at all, which will lead to uh, therefore there is no need to produce more burger. Therefore there is no need for labor, which is why this failed. So J.M. Keynes, he came back and said that classical theory will only apply to the microeconomic situation like a firm, but in a macroeconomic situation this won't apply. Here we need to manage the aggregate demand, which is the solution, and it actually worked. So, what are the contributions of the J.M. Keynes? First of all, he made the capital systems much more stable. There are no more recessions. Recessions are much lesser because of the business management cycle and aggregate demand management. Next, he called for the government intervention, which classical theory says no. For example, stimulus packages. Keynes is also the basis for the modern macroeconomic theory. For example, Atmanirbhar Bharat and the stimulus package post COVID is also focusing on aggregate demand management by pumping more and more money. Now, the rise of China. In the last 30 years, they have maintained a growth rate of approximately 10%. So again, the paradox of low inflation, high growth, we have explained above already. So this is due to high savings. So they have very high savings of 40 to 45%, high investment rates of 45 to 50%. So these are the two pillars of their high growth are high investment, high exports. Both are codependent. If one falls down, other also falls down. So they invest very large investments in infra like coastal economic zones, because of which they have very cheap imports, which will again spur the demand, again more investment and more better infra and cheaper exports. So to counter China, what we must do is we must counter the exports, which will create the problem of thrift for China, like JM Keynes also told. So this is what exactly happened. Since 2008, exports have fallen for China, and domestic demand is not enough to maintain this cycle. Also, West is following the policy of protectionism, which is why the exports have reduced. Therefore, savings are being discouraged by China because to solve the problem of thrift, they've also taken measures like currency devaluation, which will lead to more exports. But this has led to currency wars, which have later turned into trade wars and subsequent protectionism. As far as India is concerned, we must encourage savings, which will lead to more investment, which will lead to more growth. But the demand won't fall much. As we can see from the diagram, demand is already here, reduction demand, but won't lead to the oversupply because supply is already very low. During demonetization, for example, demand was much smaller than the supply. Um, Back then, we had to deal with the problem of the aggregate demand management. Next, we have vicious cycle of poverty, which is given by the Professor Ragnar Narkse, who says that poor countries are poor because they are poor. We can see from this diagram that scarcity of capital will lead to less productivity, which will lead to less income. Less income will lead to less savings, and which will lead to low investment. Again, scarcity of capital, and this keeps on happening. So the solution is capital formation, whereby we can break the cycle. This can be both by public or private. Next, this topic is done. Last topic is socio-economic goals. Very straightforward and simple topic. First, we had Millennium Development Goals (MDGs) given by UN for the period of 2005 to 2015. So there were 8 socio-economic goals with 18 sub-targets. So A is fully achieved, B is average, C is bad, and D is failed. So first one is poverty and hunger. Compared to 1990 and 2015 levels, poverty must be reduced to half and hunger must be reduced to half. India performed good in both of them. Universal primary education, India performed good. Gender equality, India performed good. Child mortality, average performance. Maternal health, MMR performed good. And institutional development, India was very bad. Combating AIDS and malaria, etc., India performed good enough. Environment sustainability, forest cover is good. Safe drinking water is good. Sanitation, India performed very bad, which is why since 2015 we have been focusing on Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. And next we have global partnership for development. India performed good enough. So just have a brief idea about this, not very important. Just know that because of poor performance in sanitation, we focused on Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. Next we have sustainable development goals, very important, given by UN for the period of 2015 to 2030. There are overall 17 goals and 116 targets with 316 indicators. So the title is Transforming Our World 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So just mug all of these goals, very important, can be used in conclusions, introductions, etc. So what is the approach of the SDGs? First one is the focus on internal resource generation. MDGs focus MGDs MDGs taught us the lesson that they had a component that developed countries would help developing countries with respect to technical assistance and financial assistance. In reality, this never happened. So SDGs, basically they said that you're on your own, you must develop on your own. So for example, economic SDGs like SDG 8, decent work and economic development, industry innovation and infra, responsible production consumption, these all focus on the internal resource generation rather than international cooperation, etc. Next, we have participatory approach, which will lead to inclusive growth. For example, decentralization, PPP models, NGO, civil society involvement. The examples are these one, which will lead to inclusive growth SDGs. Focus on environmental sustainability. All these are related to environment SDGs. Next, focusing on qualitative aspects. For example, SDG 3 and 4, which are quality education and health and well-being. Focusing on quality. For example, for education, we are focusing on reading and numeracy rather than school enrollment. Next, focusing on absolute goals. For example, MDG, poverty and hunger were to be reduced to half, whereas in SDGs, there should be completely eliminated. Next, SDGs in India, almost all the schemes are aligned with SDGs. For example, MGNREGA is coincides with SDG 8 of decent work and economic growth. National Food Security Act with zero hunger, Swachh Bharat with clean water and sanitation, renewable energy target of 175 gigawatt by 2022 with the SDG 7 of affordable and clean energy, Amrit Hriday with SDG 11 of sustainable cities and communities. Next, we Niti Aayog till 2017 we had 5-year plans given by Planning Commission. Now Niti Aayog gives 3-year action plan, 7-year national development agenda, which is this action, this strategy, whereas 15-year vision document, this vision is aligned with the SDGs. Also, Niti Aayog gives SDG India Index, which measures 15 out of 17 NDGs. This tracks the progress of states with respect to SDGs. So this leads to more competitive and cooperative federalism. So through this we can achieve these three things, which are monitoring the states which are lagging, taking corrective action to correct this, and learn from the best practices. So Economic Survey 2022, it says these are the front runners. Front runners are actually who are performing better. For SDG 14, that is life underwater, Odisha and AP are performing good. Tamil Nadu is lagging behind. Also, northeastern region district SDG index also been developed especially for northeastern region, and 64 districts are forerunners there. And these are the SDGs where India is performing good, and these are the SDGs where India is performing bad. So no state is an aspirant which is the poor performer. This is a very good sign. SDG India index has improved from 57 in 1819 to 66 in 2021. That is the recent economic survey. So this is a good improvement. So these are the stuff from the economic survey 2022 with respect to SDG India index. Next, there is a small topic called classification of countries. World Bank classification is low income, lower middle, upper middle, and higher income. This is $1,000, 1,000 to 4,000, 4,000, 12,000, and 12, more than 12,000. India with 2,100 per capita income at purchasing power parity falls in the lower and middle income group. Now UN classifies as developed countries, developing or underdeveloped country or third world country, and least developed countries. Developing countries, this is declared by the countries themselves, whereas LDC criteria is given by the ECOSOC. So, for example, China declares itself as a developing country. No one has provided any criteria. This is actually in the news right now, which is debated. And so the criteria given by ECOSOC is that first one, it should be low income criteria, that is less than $1,000. Human assets index developed by them must be poor, like education and health. Economic vulnerability index, for example, share of agriculture in GDP must be high. Landlocked country, population low, lying cost, etc. So based on all this, all these criteria, they will assign a country as the least developed country.